this story already disturbs you, stay. Because what you've heard is only the surface. Behind the silks, the gems, the poetry, were unspeakable practices hidden by power and time. Subscribe now for more forbidden truths from empires long praised but rarely questioned. Like and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? And if you lived in the Mughal court, would you have survived behind those carved stone walls? Or vanished like so many others, forgotten, unnamed? Agra 1640. The air is thick with rose oil, musk, and burning sandalwood. The sky outside the palace is still, almost mournful. The Yamuna River crawls in the distance, silver and silent under the moonlight. Inside the Zenana, the imperial harem, there is no sound but silk against stone. A girl stands barefoot at the edge of a long marble hallway. She is perhaps 9, perhaps younger. Her eyes are painted with kohl, her lips stained with crushed berries. A gold-embroidered shawl hangs off her narrow shoulders, too large for her frame. She is trembling. Servants have bathed her, perfumed her, oiled her hair and braided it with crushed jasmine. They told her she is to be presented. She does not know what that means. But her mother's absence says, enough. A eunuch dressed in crimson silk approaches. He does not smile. He does not speak. He opens a heavy teakwood door. Inside, a room glows with lanterns. Saffron smoke coils through the air and someone waits within. The child walks forward. The door closes behind her. It does not open again until morning. This is not fiction. This is not folklore. This is history. The Mughal Empire, celebrated for its architecture, poetry and wealth, hid a brutal truth behind the walls of its marble palaces. Some of its emperors were not just tyrants of land and law, they were tyrants of the body, and their victims were not just men, they were women, and often children. The Zenana was not a sanctuary. It was a system, a machine built on obedience, fear, and silence. Have you ever walked through a palace and wondered what it refused to show you? What the mosaics concealed? What history books politely skipped? If so, stay with us. Because behind the shimmer of the peacock throne lies a story of coercive power, ritual humiliation, and the empire's most unspoken scandal, the forced conscription of young girls, some barely past infancy, into the private chambers of emperors. If this story already disturbs you, stay, because what you've heard is only the surface. Behind the silks, the gems, the poetry, were unspeakable practices hidden by power and time. Subscribe now for more forbidden truths from empires long praised but rarely questioned. Like and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? And if you lived in the Mughal court, would you have survived behind those carved stone walls? Or vanished like so many others, forgotten, unnamed? Our journey begins with one simple but horrifying question. How did the greatest empire in India become a playground for coerced innocence? And why did no one dare to stop it? The Mughal harem was not a place, it was a world. And for many, it began not with an invitation, but with abduction. Young girls were taken from war-torn villages, presented as tribute from vassal kings, or purchased from slave markets that lined the empire's borders. They were often promised elevation, a life of riches, jewels, and poetry. But behind those embroidered promises lay something far more sinister. In the reign of Emperor Jahangir, the son of Akbar, records speak of young girls, not yet women, selected for the emperor's nightly diversions. One noble, in a Persian chronicle now stored in the British Library, noted that these girls were chosen for their purity of form and softness of voice, a chilling euphemism. According to the court diarist Mutamad Khan, one such girl, a 12-year-old from Rajput lineage, was paraded before Jahangir during a royal feast. By morning, she had been moved to the third chamber. The third chamber was no honor, it was a sentence, but Jahangir was not the first. He was continuing a pattern, one set into motion long before him. Let us go further back. Babur, the empire's founder, famously wrote the Baburnama, his personal memoirs. In it, he confesses something extraordinary. I developed a strange attachment to a boy in the camp, Baburi by name. I had never felt such emotions. Though the language is ambiguous, many historians, like Harold Lamb and Anna-Marie Schimmel, point out the implications. Babur expresses torment over his desires. but never condemnation. If this is the founder's inner world, what kind of court did it seed? And if male camp followers were vulnerable, what about the young girls behind the walls? By the time of Shah Jahan, the emperor who built the Taj Mahal, the harem had swelled to include over 5,000 women and girls, a mix of queens, concubines, attendants, and child slaves. According to the 17th century traveller François Bernier, the emperor's zenana was not merely a place of rest. It was a machine of availability, where girls as young as 10 were taught songs, dances, perfumes, and submission. Bernier writes, "There are girls whose songs are sweet, but whose faces are tired. They do not smile unless ordered to. A servant, nameless, speaks through a hidden memoir. I brought a girl to the emperor once. She was small, too small. Her ankles bled from the silver chains of her costume. The emperor liked her scent and said nothing else. I wept that night, but quietly. In these palaces of marble, ritual intimacy was coded into ceremony. A girl's first night was marked by opium baths, honeyed wine, and sometimes silence the next morning. And yet, these horrors were not condemned. They were expected. They were institutionalized. Because in the Mughal court, youth was not protected. It was harvested. In a palace without mirrors, no man seizes monstrosity. But how did this world come to be? How did a dynasty built on conquest become an empire of ritualized coercion behind closed doors? To answer that, we must go deeper into the culture of submission that surrounded these kings, and the system that taught them to want what should never be wanted. To the outsider, the Mughal court glittered like a dream. It was the pinnacle of Indo-Persian artistry. Calligraphers inked verses of Rumi in gold gardens bloomed with mathematically precise symmetry, and ivory chandeliers reflected starlight into mosaic fountains. But within this beauty was a disturbing paradox. The same empire that wrote poetry about divine love was training children to become instruments of desire. The Mughal obsession with youth was not a glitch. It was a design, a product of the very cultural machinery that built their empire. What the empire built in marble, it also carved into skin. The Mughal harem was modelled on Persian and Central Asian traditions, an inheritance from their Timurid and Mongol forefathers. For centuries, these empires equated power with possession, and nothing displayed possession more publicly than a harem teeming with captives. But the Mughals, especially under Akbar and Shah Jahan, amplified this model. They didn't just collect women, they engineered entire ecosystems of surveillance, servitude, and training. According to Abul Fazl, the Akbarnama boasts that the imperial harem was a realm within a realm, overseen by eunuchs, commanders, and trained servants. Every girl was registered, every act observed. And these girls weren't just from noble Muslim families. They were Hindu, Rajput, Armenian, Georgian, Kashmiri, Ethiopian, and even Chinese. Some were gifted by governors eager to please the emperor. Others were purchased in slave markets from Kabul to Surat. Age, not an obstacle. In fact, the younger, the better. Why? To touch what no one else had touched was to assert cosmic dominance. And so, within the walls of Agra and Delhi, innocence became a resource, harvested, catalogued, expended. The Mughal emperors painted themselves as divine agents, God's shadow on earth. But even shadows can grow monstrous. Islamic law officially forbade forced relations, especially with minors. But in the royal court, those same laws were reinterpreted or ignored when power demanded it. Under Aurangzeb, the most religious of the emperors, girls were still being brought in, their presence justified through doctrine. A girl's age was malleable if she appeared mature. Her silence, taken as compliance, her captivity described as protection. The emperor is chosen by God. His selection is a mercy upon the girl's family. But was it? A 10-year-old gifted to a 50-year-old emperor, trained to sing verses from the Quran in silk veils and coal-lined eyes, doesn't scream divine order. It whispers institutionalized grooming. When kings claim godhood, sins become rituals, and thus, piety became camouflage. Religious robes were wrapped around deeply profane appetites. No courtiers questioned it. No scholars rebelled. Because power, in the Mughal world, was not just political, it was cosmic. To defy the emperor, was to defy fate itself. Inside the harem, child captives were not simply locked away. They were transformed, taught music, poetry, etiquette, embroidery, but also how to speak when spoken. 2. How to kneel, how to mask pain with smiles. Older women, often former concubines, were assigned as instructors. They passed down what they'd once been, forced to learn. Your perfume must be sweet, but not stronger than the emperor's. Do not make eye contact unless he permits it. Laughter must be soft, body still, voice lower than silk. A fictionalized memoir from a eunuch describes the process. The girl was 11. She was taught to bathe with rosewater, then oiled until her skin gleamed. I dressed her. She asked why. I did not answer. That night, she was sent to the third door. She did not return the same. This was not culture. It was conversion of body into object, of soul into silence. When education erases the self, it is not education. It is preparation for ownership. The Mughal Empire is famed for its art, miniature paintings, silk murals, embroidered tapestries, and yes, portraits of harems. But look closely at these images. You'll find young, doll-like figures with glassy eyes, posed in exotic positions, surrounded by music, wine, and older men. The intention wasn't to capture truth, it was to aestheticize dominance. These images weren't documents, they were propaganda, to veil the grotesque in beauty. The harem was always both a site of confinement and imagination. Its horrors were made beautiful, so they could be ignored, and we, centuries later, still marvel at that beauty, rarely asking what it cost. But now, the mask is slipping, because what began as an imperial tradition would soon evolve into organized, systematic, sexualized power, woven into policy, punishment, and pleasure. What happens when an emperor's appetite becomes imperial law? A palace can reflect the stars above, or the darkness within. By the 17th century, the Mughal harem had grown beyond walls. It had become an empire within the empire, a self-sustaining apparatus fed by war, trade, religion, and fear. What began as the indulgence of kings had transformed into a ritualized system of coercion and exploitation, not just for women, but for boys, too, and most terrifyingly, for children. When sin becomes system, cruelty wears a crown. Slave auctions were common across the empire. Markets in Agra, Delhi, Lahore, and Kabul traded in silk, spices, and children. These were not hidden bazaars. They were state-sanctioned, regulated by local governors who paid tribute to the throne through flesh. According to the 18th century chronicler Khafi Khan, slave traders would line up girls in age order, freshly bathed, perfumed, and painted. Buyers were court nobles. Bidding was silent, done through gestures. The younger the girl, the higher the price. A girl no more than 9 was led forward by a eunuch. Her feet were bare, anklets jingled with each step. A veil was placed over her head, not for modesty, but to increase curiosity. She was sold before she ever spoke. These weren't isolated crimes. They were embedded in courtly culture. Young captives were processed like assets, tagged, trained, tracked. Some were labeled as singing birds, trained for song and poetry. Others were delicate flowers, trained for silence, obedience, and presence. And the most prized were those considered untouched. Their value was not in their skills, but in their absence of corruption. In a system this vast, who protected the girls? No one, but they were watched. Always. The Mughal court's most feared figures were not generals. They were eunuchs, castrated in early boyhood. Often forcibly, they were trained as loyal agents of the harem. Neither fully man nor woman, they were considered safe to oversee the imperial women. But in truth, they were the gatekeepers of coercion. According to the memoirs of Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, a French traveller, eunuchs controlled everything from bathing schedules to entry protocols. Some became powerful brokers, accepting bribes, arranging secret liaisons, and delivering young girls to the emperor under the guise of ritual. I once saw a eunuch strike a girl across the face because she flinched at the emperor's gaze. She was 7. The eunuch whispered, "Smile, or he will send you away, and you will wish he hadn't." Many eunuchs were themselves victims, taken as boys, mutilated and remade into tools. But over time, Some became kings of their own shadows. They wielded enormous influence in court decisions, wars, and succession battles, all while running the most disturbing institution in the empire, the child grooming infrastructure. When the wounded are given power, they often wound in return. Every Mughal campaign, whether into Rajputana, Bengal, or the Deccan, ended with two rituals: a formal tribute to the emperor, a silent offering to the harem. This offering often included young girls and boys, gifted by defeated rulers desperate to survive. In a letter preserved in Persian records from Aurangzeb's general, a list of gifts included 1 elephant of ivory tusks, 3 gold bangles, and a virgin of the Chandela line, 11 years in age, of noble upbringing. No one questioned it. This was normal, expected, feared. Even Hindu kings, once proud, militant, defiant, offered their own daughters, nieces, or sisters to Mughal harems. Not out of admiration, but to avoid extinction. In the empire of shame, surrender came not by sword, but by silk. There were whispers, among eunuchs, spies, and foreign observers, that within some Mughal palaces existed private theatres of cruelty, rooms designed not for romance, but for performance not of music, but of innocence. Some claimed that emperors like Muhammad Shah Rangila kept secret playrooms, where girls under 12 were taught to mimic adult gestures. These girls were awarded pearls for pleasing behavior, punished with isolation for disobedience. He laughed at their attempts to dance, not because it was joyful, but because they didn't yet understand what they were being made into. No records confirm these rooms directly, but their shadows stain enough scrolls, enough poems, enough rumors, that denial is no longer an option, and behind all of it stood the emperor. His desire was law, his gaze a verdict, but what corrupted him? Was it grief, madness, upbringing, or a deeper illness of empire? A crown may weigh heavy, but some hearts are already hollow. What makes a man, raised with poetry, power, and prayer, seek the arms of a child for comfort? What breaks inside him? Is it lust, is it power, or something far deeper and far more human? The greater the throne, the deeper the fracture beneath it. Let us look not just at what the emperors did, but why they did it. He is remembered as Akbar the Great, a unifier, philosopher-king, patron of the arts. But Akbar's obsession with control was not limited to politics. As a child, he was raised without parents. His father, Humayun, fled into exile. His mother was absent. Akbar grew up in the brutal, lonely atmosphere of a military camp, tutored by warriors, surrounded by death. According to Abul Fazl, Akbar trusted no one but himself, and viewed emotion as a weakness. He built a harem of over 5,000 women and girls, some as diplomatic brides, others for reasons far less political. Akbar ordered every woman, regardless of age or rank, to be documented, categorized, and managed like royal assets. He even invented a new calendar where certain nights were astrologically ripe for sexual ritual. Where love cannot be trusted, power becomes the only form of intimacy. But Akbar still functioned. The real fracture would come later, with his descendants. Shah Jahan, the grief that became Hunger Shah Jahan, is hailed for the Taj Mahal, the world's greatest monument to love. But after the death of Mumtaz Mahal, his favorite wife, something inside him broke. Court chroniclers say he went into seclusion for a year. He refused to change clothes. He gave up court ceremonies. When he emerged, he was a different man. According to Niccolao Minucci, an Italian physician at court, Shah Jahan's behavior became erratic. He developed a morbid obsession with untouched beauty. He surrounded himself with younger and younger girls. He commissioned perfumes said to mimic the scent of Mumtaz's skin, and at night he would request dancers no older than the full moon, a poetic euphemism for girls not yet 14. Grief metastasized into obsession, and obsession became entitlement. He once asked for a girl who resembled Mumtaz. She was barely 10. The resemblance was in the eyes. He stared at her for hours without speaking, then dismissed her. Days later, she was summoned again. He built the world's greatest tomb, but buried his conscience with it. Aurangzeb. Piety as punishment. Aurangzeb was the most religious of the Mughal rulers. strict, austere, righteous. He banned wine, music, and public celebrations. He wore simple clothes, slept on straw mats, and fasted religiously, but his piety masked violence. Though outwardly moral, Aurangzeb maintained a vast harem, including child concubines. And unlike his forefathers, he framed these acts through doctrine, justifying them as lawful under selective interpretations of Islamic texts. Historian Jadunath Sarkar notes that Aurangzeb would often quote hadiths about maturity through appearance to silence objections from clerics. A girl's age, he said, was between her and God. Aurangzeb did not drink wine. He drank absolution and used it to wash away the screams of his victims. Even his own daughters were watched, not for safety, but for subversion. And then came the clown prince of decline, Muhammad Shah Rangila. He ruled in the 18th century, long after the Mughal sun had begun to dim. Known for his taste in poetry, perfume, and pleasure, Rangila was surrounded by entertainers, dancers, and girls barely into puberty. A British observer wrote, "The emperor hosts nightly amusements, where virgins dressed as apsaras entertain until dawn." But it was no innocent pastime. The girls were brought in from Bengal, Kashmir, and Gujarat, some kidnapped during famines. They were fed opium-laced sweets, taught to mimic love, and paraded before courtiers. He once renamed a girl after a flower that grew outside his window. She was 7. He said she reminded him of spring. She never danced again. Rangila's palace was a house of mirrors, every reflection a distorted craving, refracted through trauma, boredom, and unchecked sovereignty. When empires rot, they do not weep. They laugh and devour. The psychological machinery, power, isolation, and unpunished desire. What binds these rulers? They lived in isolation from birth. They were raised to believe that their word was divine law. They were surrounded by servants, spies, and seducers. They had no equals, no friends, no limits. So what happens when a child grows up in such a world? He does not learn love. He learns possession. He does not learn consent. He learns compliance. In the Mughal palace, emotion was a luxury, and cruelty was a language. Their desires, left unchallenged, decayed into delusions, until innocence itself became the final frontier of domination. When kings go mad, it is the voiceless who suffer first. No empire sins in silence. For every child brought into the harem, a family was silenced. For every ritualized coercion, an entire court bowed their heads. And for every ruler who treated innocence as indulgence, the empire itself fractured from throne to threshold. Power commits the crime. Silence makes it permanent. Let us follow the ripple effects, from the perfumed chambers of the harem to the battlefields, the mosques, the markets, and the very soul of Mughal India. The imperial court became a theatre of complicity. Nobles, advisors, generals, even poets enabled the system. Not because they approved, but because they feared exclusion. In Mughal hierarchy, access to the emperor's pleasure chambers meant proximity to power. To object to the abuse was to commit political suicide. According to the writings of Niccolao Manucci, a foreign doctor in the court of Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb, the men who presented the emperor with young girls were rewarded with titles, land, and jewels. I watched a minister offer his own niece to the emperor after a failed campaign. He wept when he did it, but he did it nonetheless. Over time, the court didn't just accept the system, it became addicted to it. Loyalty wasn't proven on the battlefield anymore. It was proven through sacrifice of innocence. In a corrupt court, virtue becomes the first enemy. Where were the ulama, the clerics, the moral compass of the empire? Present, watching, silent. While some whispered dissent in private, most scholars justified the harem by cloaking it in theology. The prophet's wives were sequestered, they said. The king's will is divine, they said. The girl is a gift, and her presence a blessing, they said. When Aurangzeb, the self-declared defender of Islamic law, expanded his harem with child concubines, no fatwa was issued, no public condemnation, only footnotes in forgotten records, whispers of excess, never called what they truly were, violations. A girl may be mature if she bleeds or if her body blossoms. The emperor is the best judge of her readiness, and thus, The law bent to protect the predator, not the prey. When scripture kneels to the sword, faith becomes a mask. Humility, discipline erodes. Loyalty corrupts even the Mughal army, the once feared force that crushed Afghan rebellions and Rajput sieges, felt the effects of the palace's decay. Generals began competing not for military valor, but for access to the Zanana harem influence dictated promotions, and gifted children replaced battlefield victories as tokens of favor. Later Mughal records describe military officers rewarded not with land, but with eunuch-administered nights of pleasure within the emperor's private palace. He fought like a tiger in Bengal, came back, got nothing. Another man brought the emperor a 12-year-old dancer. He was made governor of Gujarat. The military's moral code, once rooted in honor, was now infected with proximity politics and depravity. And what happens when soldiers no longer respect their emperor, only fear him? They wait, they watch, they plot. The common people, fear and resignation. Outside the palace walls, in dusty alleys and sacred courtyards, people whispered. They knew, they always knew. When your daughter disappeared and no one investigated, when a caravan of palace elephants came through the town square and a noblewoman sobbed in silence, when gold coins were tossed at your family's feet for the honor of surrendering your niece, you knew, but what could you do? To resist was to vanish, to speak was to lose everything. So they bowed their heads and told their daughters to walk barefoot when the royal army passed, so they'd appear less beautiful. In a kingdom of predators, parents raised daughters like offerings, but not everyone stayed silent. Some plotted, some wrote, and some, when the time came, burned the palaces to the ground. The consequences weren't just moral, they were institutional. As the abuse escalated, so too did secrecy, paranoia, and surveillance. Emperors feared assassination. They rotated eunuch guards weekly. They executed whispering concubines. Some rulers, like Farrukhsiyar, lived their final years behind locked doors, trusting no one. But resistance simmered. Poems appeared in public markets mocking gilded monsters. A Sufi saint cursed the palace, predicting blood would flood its gardens, and a servant girl, according to oral tradition, once drugged a king and escaped the harem, vanishing. Into myth, the Mughal system built on abuse could not sustain itself. It hollowed out from within, rot spread until the crown crumbled under its own silence. When a throne is built on bodies, collapse is not a question of if, but when. It took over 2 centuries to build the Mughal Empire. It took just 1 generation to start its fall. But the collapse didn't begin on the battlefield. It began in bedchambers, in corridors of velvet and fear, in the stolen childhoods that cried behind silk screens. Empires fall not when the enemy arrives, but when the soul is already gone. By the late 1600s, the empire was decaying, not just politically, but morally. The people had lost faith, the generals had lost loyalty, the clerics had lost integrity, and the emperors had lost themselves. Behind every rebellion, there was resentment. Behind every assassination, silence breaking, and the explosions started, not with a coup, but with a whisper. Farrukhsiyar was the first to pay the full price. Paranoid, isolated, addicted to opium and young bodies, he rarely emerged. From the harem, he trusted eunuchs more than generals, and he ruled from behind silk curtains, until one day the curtains turned red. In 1719, his own courtiers betrayed him. He was dragged from the harem in the middle of the night, screaming, half naked, clutching a child. He was blinded with red-hot needles, executed, and buried in silence. They say he begged them not to harm the girl, not out of mercy, out of habit. She was just 9. The guards spared her, but nothing of him was left by morning. His death marked a turning point. For the first time in centuries, a Mughal emperor was punished. When the court kills its king, it is not rebellion. It is a funeral for shame. While the palace bled, the provinces burned. Rajputs revolted. Marathas pushed north. Bengal slipped into de facto independence, and within the military, discipline evaporated. Soldiers refused to protect royal caravans. They looted treasuries. They freed captive girls from convoys headed to Delhi. We do not fight the Mughals for land. We fight them because they steal our daughters and call it tribute. The harem system that once intimidated enemies had now become its own insult, a symbol of imperial hypocrisy. Even the Ottomans, once allies, described the Mughals as decadent men behind gold walls. When a kingdom's worst secrets become public, swords follow faster than prayers. In 1739, Nader Shah of Persia invaded Mughal India. He crossed the Indus with fire in his eyes and cruelty in his veins. But he didn't just want gold. He wanted humiliation. When he entered Delhi, he stormed the Red Fort. He demanded entry into the Zenana. His soldiers broke open the harem gates. For the first time in centuries, the royal women screamed in public. The silence of the imperial harem shattered. Women ran barefoot, blood on silk. Children hid behind broken pillars. The Persian soldiers laughed. Nader Shah plundered the peacock throne, looted the Koh-i-Noor diamond, and in that moment stripped the Mughals of their last illusion, control. And as the throne was carried away, something else vanished with it: fear of the Mughals. When predators are unmasked, even the prey will strike back. The emperors who followed were ghosts: Ahmad Shah, Shah Alam, Bahadur Shah Zafar. They ruled in name, not power. Their harems shrank. Their voices trembled. Their servants mocked them. The British now pulled the strings, and behind the curtain, the silk had rotted to dust. In 1857, during the Sepoy Mutiny, Indian rebels asked Bahadur Shah Zafar for leadership. He responded, "I am no king. I am a prisoner in my own house." Even his harem was gone, disbanded by British decree. The child courtesans had either fled, been enslaved, or simply vanished. The throne did not fall in battle. It fell every night a child was silenced, behind a locked door. The Mughal Empire is gone. Its marble palaces are tourist sites. Its emperors are long buried, but the harem still casts a shadow, not in stone, but in silence, not in law, but in the wounds that never made it into the official record. History forgets what it finds inconvenient, but trauma remembers, even without a name. Walk into a modern museum in Delhi or Lahore. You'll see jade goblets, jeweled daggers, miniature paintings, but you won't see the girls. You won't see the children. You won't see what was done to them. Most official Mughal histories, the Akbarnama, the Shah Jahan Nama, the Tuzk-e-Jahangiri, erase or romanticize the abuse. They focus on architecture, conquest, diplomacy, as if these kings ruled with clean hands. Even modern textbooks reduce harems to living quarters or cultural spaces. But as you've seen tonight, they were far more than that. I spent my life studying Mughal poetry, and I kept asking, who were these unnamed girls the poets praised and passed over? Who were they before they were renamed and erased? Their names may be lost, but their truth is not. The Mughal harem was not just a system. It was a mindset, a belief that power grants access, that silence equals loyalty. That age can be bent by authority. That mindset did not die with the empire. You see echoes of it today, in powerful men shielding themselves with tradition, in institutions that silence victims to protect family. Honor, in the phrase "boys will be boys," used to dismiss predatory behavior, in the idea that a girl's value lies in beauty, silence, and obedience. The empire may have fallen, but the entitlement it nurtured still walks among us. When abuse is normalized in palaces, it doesn't vanish. It trickles downward, into homes, into schools, into families. In South Asia today, child marriage is still practiced. Girls are still traded under religious pretense or economic desperation, and abusers still hide behind veils of piety, honor, and political immunity. In some circles, Mughal kings are still romanticized, their harems painted as exotic luxuries rather than systems of state-sanctioned abuse. A Bollywood movie shows a young empress learning poetry, but not the girl crying in a gold-plated bath. A historian praises Akbar's tolerance, but not his obsessive cataloguing of child concubines. We inherit the stories they left us, but we also inherit the stories they buried. It is easy to glorify an empire. It is harder to mourn what it consumed. There are no memorials. For the girls of the Mughal harem, no plaques, no tombstones, not even a list of names, but they existed. They bled. They vanished. They shaped history not through power, but through what was taken from them. They told her to be silent, to be graceful, to be royal. She obeyed. And when she died, they replaced her the same day, as if she were a silk pillow. Some may call this exposé disrespectful. Others may say it tarnishes national pride, but pride built on selective memory is not pride, it is propaganda. You cannot heal what you refuse to name. If you've made it this far, you're not just a viewer, you are a witness. You've seen what most history books won't show. You've walked the blood-soaked corridors, behind the velvet curtains. You've heard the voices that were never allowed to speak. Now the question is, what will you do with this truth? Will you challenge the myths? Will you tell others what lies beneath the marble? Will you look at power differently, from palaces to parliaments? If this story disturbed you, good, it should, but let it also move you to speak, to remember, to share. Subscribe for more forbidden histories. Comment below what shocked you most, and tell us which part of this story felt the most real to you. Empires rise, empires fall, but truth survives when someone dares to speak it.